Okay, we're at the University of Ottawa where the Canadian Economics Association is meeting, and a subgroup of the Canadian Economics Association is the Progressive Economics Forum, which is a group of progressive economists and others who are interested in economic issues. We're used to getting economic advice. We often see it on the news from what I would call conventional economists who would tell you that corporate tax cuts, for instance, are a good thing, or that government is bloated and needs to be cut. There are other points of view, and the kind of people who are meeting here today at the Progressive Economics Forum conference have a lot to say on that, and are working in many fields in which an alternative perspective in economics and politics and sociology often are very helpful and can help to guide organizations, businesses, and political parties and unions in useful and positive directions. Okay, it's June the 3rd, right? June 3rd in Ottawa. I'm talking to Jim Stanford at the conference of the Progressive Economics Forum. Tell us about the background of the Progressive Economics Forum, Jim.
The Progressive Economics Forum is a network, not just economists, but others who are interested in economic-related issues, folks who are concerned about the social and environmental impacts of economic activity, but who tend to reject the free market always knows best mentality that most economists tend to bring. So we formed our network 13 years ago, right here at the University of Ottawa, and among other things, every year we host a few panels when the regular Economics Association meets, as they're doing here this week, to try and highlight the sort of critical or heterodox side of our profession and help people know there are economic alternatives.
We're quite accustomed to seeing news reports where where the reporters will interview a conventional, if not a conservative economist, and that person's opinions will be conveyed as if they are writ. We don't often hear a progressive economist interviewed in these kinds of contexts. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's partly the general problem we face with the establishment media. Most of it is owned by private corporations, and there's a natural inherent bias, including how they report on economic issues. So you will see a steady lineup of economists who work for chartered banks, for example, stand up and say how wonderful our deregulated, privatized financial system is operating. Well, big surprise there.
Or corporate tax cuts.
Exactly, the same sort of an argument. I think with economics it's even worse than with other disciplines, because there is a kind of a fake sort of pseudo-scientific I know best mentality. Most people's eyes glaze over when you start talking about economics. There's all this technical mumbo-jumbo, most of which is totally unnecessary for what economists do, but economists tend to invoke it to sort of make themselves look like the high priests of this mysterious discipline. And that tends to intimidate people, first of all, and then sort of cloak the profession in this, I would say, quite phony technical mumbo-jumbo. So part of our goal as progressive economists is indeed to try and democratize economics, to say, first of all, economics is too important to be left to the economists. You don't have to be a mathematician in order to engage in economic ideas and economic debates. And everyone who gets out of bed and does a job and produces some value added in the world has as much right to comment on economics as does the stockbroker or the mutual fund manager or the hedge fund executive that you typically see. So that's been a part of our mission. We try not to be sectarian about it. We do engage with mainstream economists. Here, we're meeting with them, after all, and they will often come to our panels and speak at our panels. They'll invite us to speak at their panels. So, but it is very much a battle of ideas between people who think that free markets work best when left alone, and others like us who highlight the problems of a private free market world.
What kind of issues are you hearing this week at the conference?
Well, our group, the PEF, is sponsoring panels on a number of, I think, very timely issues. We had one this morning on household debt and the explosion of household debt in Canada and other industrialized countries, and the possible consequences of that down the road. We're going to be looking at poverty, inequality issues. We're going to be critiquing some of the free trade agreements that are being negotiated and what they would actually mean for Canada and for Canadians. So it's quite a rich range of topics that we're covering. This will be our biggest set of panels ever in our 13 years. We're putting on about 10 different events here.
Okay. How many economists and others belong to the PEF?
Oh, we have about 125 paying members, and we're always trying to recruit folks, including from the people attending the mainstream association here. And then we have others who, just drop in and follow us. We have a blog, progressiveeconomics.ca, where some of our members are commenting on economic issues as they come up. That gets quite a bit of coverage. Not as much coverage as Straight Goods, of course, but we're in the same ballpark.
You work for the Canadian Auto Workers for a union. I presume a number of the other economists in PEF work for unions. What other kind of organizations do they work for?
Well, there's a handful of other PEF members who are economists for other unions, but, there's only 5 or 7 union economists in the whole country, really. So there's some who work in regular economics departments at universities. There's some who work in other departments at universities, because economics departments often are kind of closed-minded about people adopting different views. So it's easier to get a job in a faculty like public administration, say, or labor studies or something like that than in an economics department per se. We also have a lot of people working for NGOs, different community organizations, cooperatives, and some people working for government. So there's actually more range of debate, more range of opinion within the economics profession than is often given credit for. And part of our goal as the PEF is to give people a meeting place so that together we have a bit of critical mass to influence the profession. And most of all show that economics is not a unanimous doctrine. There's actually a tremendous debate and a tremendous range of views within the profession.
Do you take up campaigns? Does the forum take up campaigns or actions?
By and large, our network has not been an activist group per se, although most of the members are obviously involved in a whole range of political causes, social movements, and so on. I think given our resources and our sort of reason for being, we've been smart so far to focus mostly on providing people the resources, providing them the chance to get to know each other, supporting students. A progressive-minded student going through economics would get totally lost with the mainstream curriculum. So we're trying to provide resources, essay contests, other supports for them going through. That's how we can make the most difference, I think.
And how about your work? What are the preoccupations you find yourself concerned with at this point?
Well, as the economist for the auto workers, I have to follow the different industries where our members are working, including auto, obviously, but other manufacturing, transportation. We're in a big struggle right now with Air Canada over how the workers at Air Canada are going to be rewarded after all the sacrifice that was part of helping that company to survive. I also get to engage in all the policy work and lobbying and research that the union does, as well as, with some of my time, get to be just a progressive economist in the public milieu, if you like. So it's a wonderful job. It's overwhelming at times, but never boring. I can assure you of that.
I'm sure with a Harper majority government in control, it'll be even less boring.
Yeah, I think we're in for some very, very challenging years ahead of us, and this is where everyone in whatever part of Canada you live in has to stand up and say, doesn't matter what the numbers are in Parliament. We have to fight for our basic rights, for security, for dignity, for decent living standards, and fight in every way that we can over the next few years so that we can stop Harper, even if he does have a majority in the Parliament.
And progressive economists will have a role to play in this fight.
I think so. Think, Ish, almost every demand that we're fighting on, whether it's environment or poverty or the need for more public services, what is the first counter-argument that we come up against? It's going to be some economic argument around you can't afford it, the money's not there, the deficit's too big, investors will leave. Right? There's always an economic argument to say to Canadians, this demand, no matter how morally legitimate it might be, isn't possible. It isn't feasible. And that's where we really need to have the confidence and the arguments and the facts to say, no, it is legitimate and it is feasible.
Thank you very much, Jim.
All right, Ish. Glad to be here.
Pleasure. I'm talking to David Robinson of Laurentian University at the Progressive Economics Forum Conference here at University of Ottawa. Tell me about the kind of work you do, David.
Most of my work's about the economic development of Northern Ontario. And you probably know Northern Ontario was grabbed by Toronto as a whole resource region to exploit. And the model of governance in Northern Ontario is exactly the same model as the British colonies back in the 1600s. That is, you got a little town and it's supported by selling off the resources to pay for all its business. The trouble with that is it doesn't lead to any development in Northern Ontario. So where Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Alberta all became provinces, Northern Ontario is still an internal colony of Southern Ontario. That means we don't get development. It means we have an awful lot of poorer people, especially in the First Nations, than we would otherwise. And it's largely a result of a colonial form of government.
As an economist, how do you work towards changing that scenario?
Well, a couple of things. One of the more important ones from my point of view is trying to develop, supporting people working for community forestry, for local control of the forests. If you're a big company and you're trying to ship out of a sawmill, what you're interested in is volume. If you're a small community, what you're interested in is value added. That's what jobs are. The big companies mainly make their money by cutting jobs. A community has a huge interest in building jobs, making jobs. So they would allocate forest product, the wood, the chips, everything, to local businesses. That would mean local jobs. So until local communities get control of the wood, the local communities can't develop. It's really simple. You can't develop the people, you can't develop the jobs, you can't develop the value-added exports.
So you work with local communities to develop strategies for taking
Yes,
control?
that's right. And I do the academic job of trying to provide the theory behind it. Why is community control actually economically more productive than what we're doing now?
How does your work with the university enable you to work with communities? They reach you, they come to you?
They come to me. And, of course, the great thing is, as a tenured professor, I can afford to do this. Right? Once you have tenure, you can go and you can talk to somebody in Hearst and say, look, this is colonial and you aren't ever going to get anywhere unless you get some control of it. And they're happy to hear that because nobody in the government will say it to them. Everybody except me and a few others tell them, oh no, you could never do anything different.
Isn't that something? Can you point, I know we don't have much time before you have to go to the next session, can you point to an instance of a project you've become involved with where the local community has been able to make some progress away from that colonial economic picture?
Have we made it any great distance? No, but I mean, one of the projects I did is I worked with 6 mayors, Chapleau through White River and Dubreuilville and 3 others. And in the process, helped set up something called the Northeast Superior Community Forest. And they're working to develop job prospects. And that came out in part of my analysis. Another project is realizing that Northern Ontario isn't going to export value-added wood products unless it has design capacity, because, of course, that's where you're adding human talent. I'm the one who started a Northern Ontario School of Architecture that's due for opening now in 2013.
Well, those sound like fairly significant projects.
Well, they're a lot of fun, and, of course, couldn't do that if I weren't tenured.
Great. Thank you very much for your time, David.
Thank you. That was fun.
Hey, I'm talking to Brendan Haley at the Progressive Economics Forum conference here at the University of Ottawa, June 3rd in Ottawa. Tell me about your work, Brendan.
Well, right now I'm doing a PhD. It's in public policy, which is a mixture of politics and economics at Carleton University. And I work on energy and climate change policy and sort of the evolution of renewable energy technologies and how policy impacts those technologies.
What's the cutting edge here? How does this field that you work in affect life and business and the economy and society?
Well, the field I work in is, in particular, climate change. So, I think that's, arguably one of the most important issues that society is facing right now.
What are the economics of climate change? How does that...
Yeah, well, it depends on how you approach the economics of climate change. Because right now, there is quite a lot of discourse in terms of climate change policy, which I would say tends to be more influenced by neoclassical economists, which is the major thing we have to do is put in a carbon price and then the market will sort it out. The position I'm trying to take is that, yes, that's necessary but not sufficient. We also really need to think about the very particular sort of technological systems that are developing in Canada and how those are going to develop politically, but also through much more targeted policies specific to technology. So I'm looking at hydroelectricity and the potentials of using hydroelectricity as a mechanism to leverage and further the development of a whole bunch of other low carbon technologies such as wind, and so that is a very different approach in terms of methodologically, epistemologically. I would say in terms of economics, it's a much more sort of heterodox approach that is trying to approach climate change from a bit of a different perspective of how technologies, low carbon technologies, actually develop.
It's more than just numbers, isn't it? There's the whole political and environmental, social consideration.
Yeah, I'd say, sort of more heterodox approaches to economics really challenge you to do that. So, I mean, for instance, if you look at the example of the carbon market, well, we keep saying in terms of policy that, well, we need to create something that's called the carbon market, right? And that would be great if we could actually create that. But in Canada, we're actually learning that politically it's incredibly difficult to create the carbon market. And if you go back to sort of basic political economy, when we decide to create new markets, it's not really because someone thinks it's a good idea. It's often because there's very particular political interests and there's histories behind those political interests that decide to create a particular type of market. And I think, in terms of climate change policy, we actually have to step back and we have to say, even if you want something like a carbon tax or a cap and trade or something like that, to actually get the political support for that and to actually have that do something within your economy, you're going to go right back to what are the political interests behind supporting the development of solar technologies, wind technologies, or a whole bunch of other low-carbon technologies. What are the sort of types of economic security that people feel with respect to this transition to a low-carbon economy? Those are all very political questions that you can't divorce them, I think, from the economic policy.
And I think you've answered this, but perhaps you could answer it in another way. Why is it important to have progressive economists involved in these kinds of debates?
Yeah, well, I think it's important because it brings a different kind of perspective. And I think, well, for me, I mean, just in terms of my own personal history, is I did, an undergrad in economics, and then I did a master's in environmental studies, and now I'm doing a PhD in public policy. So it's arguable whether or not I'm studying economics, proper. But one thing that's really been useful in terms of the Progressive Economics Forum and what they do is there's a whole bunch of people that are taking these types of approaches that are slightly, outside of the mainstream, and it's a good opportunity to sort of see what other people are doing in completely different fields. And traditionally we didn't divorce politics and economics like we do now. And I think here, there are, in the Progressive Economics Forum, there are people who are studying economics from a more holistic perspective, from a perspective that brings in the politics of it, that brings in a whole bunch of the sociology of it, for instance, that brings in those things and tries to reinforce that what they're studying is actually economics too. They might have different types of names. We call it heterodox economics or political economics. But to say that, economics is not neoclassical economics is a certain type of economics, but there's a whole bunch of other types of economics out there that arguably could say, more relevant things about economic policy and public policy that bring in politics and sociology and ecology and a whole bunch of other disciplines along with it.
What do you expect your degree will enable you to do, your doctorate? What are your plans after that?
Right. Well, that's a good question because right now I don't nicely fit into an economics department, maybe political science. But I mean, what I work in is there's a whole bunch of new schools of sort of energy and the environment, and so those are the types of things I work in. But I could also go and work for an NGO. I could also go work, in outside of academia as well.